Summary of the Book of Enoch. 1st Enoch. The Book of Enoch, also known as 1st Enoch, is an ancient Jewish apocalyptic text attributed pseudepigraphically to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. Though not included in the Hebrew Bible or most Christian canons, it is considered canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The book profoundly influenced early Jewish mysticism and Christian theology. Composition and structure. The text is not a single unified work, but a compilation written between approximately the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE. It consists of 5 major sections: the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch. Enoch as a mediator. Enoch is portrayed as a righteous man chosen by God to receive divine knowledge. He acts as an intermediary between heaven and earth, granted visions of cosmic order, judgment, and the fate of humanity. The Fall of the Watchers. The Book of the Watchers recounts the descent of angels, watchers, who rebel against God by mating with human women. This transgression disrupts divine order and introduces corruption into the world. The Nephilim. From these unions emerge the Nephilim, giants who devastate the earth through violence and excess. Their actions symbolize unchecked power and moral decay, intensifying humanity's corruption. Forbidden knowledge. Fallen angels teach humans illicit knowledge, including warfare, sorcery, astrology, and cosmetics. These teachings accelerate moral decline and alienate humanity from divine law. Divine judgment of the Watchers. God commands archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, to punish the Watchers. They are bound and imprisoned until the final judgment, illustrating divine justice and cosmic accountability. The flood motif. The corruption caused by the Watchers provides theological justification for the flood. Unlike Genesis, Enoch emphasizes angelic sin rather than human wrongdoing as the catalyst for destruction. The Book of Parables. This section introduces the figure of the Son of Man, a pre-existent, messianic figure who executes divine judgment. This concept later resonates strongly with early Christian theology. Righteousness and the elect. The righteous, called the elect, are promised vindication and eternal reward. The book stresses moral perseverance amid oppression and injustice. The Astronomical Book. Enoch receives detailed revelations about celestial movements, calendars, and cosmic laws. This reflects an ancient attempt to harmonize religious belief with observable natural order. Sacred time and order. The astronomical teachings emphasize divine precision and sacred time, reinforcing the belief that chaos arises when humanity deviates from God's ordained structure. Dream visions. In symbolic dreams, Enoch recounts Israel's history from creation to the Eschaton. Animals represent nations and figures, offering a coded theological interpretation of history. Judgment of nations. These visions emphasize that no nation escapes divine justice. Power, empire, and tyranny are temporary, while righteousness endures eternally. The Epistle of Enoch. This final section addresses future generations, warning sinners and encouraging the righteous. Ethical accountability is central, stressing deeds over status. Resurrection and afterlife. The book teaches a developed doctrine of resurrection and post-mortem judgment. Souls are separated according to righteousness, anticipating later Jewish and Christian beliefs. The fate of sinners. Sinners face eternal punishment, described vividly as darkness, fire, and separation from divine light. Justice is portrayed as both moral and cosmic. God's sovereignty. Throughout the text, God's authority over angels, humans, and the cosmos is absolute. Even heavenly beings are subject to divine law. Influence on early Christianity. The Book of Enoch influenced New Testament thought, especially in Jude, Revelation, and Christological titles like Son of Man. Early Christians widely read and cited it. Enduring significance. Though excluded from most canons, the Book of Enoch remains essential for understanding Second Temple Judaism, apocalyptic literature, and the theological roots of later Abrahamic traditions. Summary of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest surviving works of world literature, originating in ancient Mesopotamia. It was composed in Akkadian, with earlier Sumerian poems forming its foundation, and preserved on clay tablets dating mainly to the 2nd millennium BCE. Gilgamesh as king. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, is described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. Despite his strength and wisdom, he initially rules tyrannically, abusing his power and causing suffering among his people. Divine intervention. The people of Uruk cry out to the gods for relief. In response, the gods create Enkidu, a wild man meant to balance and challenge Gilgamesh's dominance. Enkidu's creation and nature. Enkidu lives among animals, embodying natural innocence and strength. He represents humanity in harmony with nature, untouched by civilization. Enkidu's civilizing. Through his encounter with the priestess Shamhat, Enkidu was introduced to sexuality, language, and culture. This transition separates him from the animal world and integrates him into human society. Friendship and brotherhood. When Enkidu meets Gilgamesh, they battle fiercely but ultimately form a deep bond. Their friendship transforms Gilgamesh, tempering his arrogance and awakening empathy. The quest for glory. Tempering his arrogance and awakening empathy. Seeking fame, Gilgamesh persuades Enkidu to join him on a dangerous expedition to the cedar forest to confront Humbaba, its monstrous guardian. Slaying of Humbaba. Despite warnings, the heroes defeat and kill Humbaba. Their victory brings renown but also divine disapproval for violating sacred boundaries. Ishtar's proposal. The goddess Ishtar proposes marriage to Gilgamesh, but he rejects her, citing her destructive past relationships. This insult provokes her wrath. The Bull of Heaven. In revenge, Ishtar sends the Bull of Heaven to devastate Uruk. Gilgamesh and Enkidu slay the bull, further angering the gods. Divine punishment. The gods decree that Enkidu must die as punishment for these transgressions. His death marks a turning point in the epic. Enkidu's death. Enkidu suffers a prolonged illness and curses his fate before reconciling with it. His death confronts Gilgamesh with the reality of mortality. Fear of death. Grief-stricken, Gilgamesh becomes obsessed with escaping death. He abandons his kingdom to search for eternal life. Journey to Utnapishtim. Gilgamesh undertakes a perilous journey across mountains, deserts, and waters to find Utnapishtim, the only human granted immortality. The Flood Narrative. Utnapishtim recounts how the gods once sent a great flood to destroy humanity, but he survived by building an ark. This story parallels later flood traditions. The Test of Wakefulness. Utnapishtim challenges Gilgamesh to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh fails, demonstrating human limitation. The Plant of Rejuvenation. Although immortality is denied, Gilgamesh obtains a plant that restores youth. However, a serpent steals it while he bathes. Acceptance of mortality. Gilgamesh realizes that eternal life is unattainable. Wisdom lies in accepting human limits rather than defying them. Return to Uruk. He returns home transformed, appreciating the enduring achievements of civilization, particularly the walls of Uruk, as symbols of human legacy. Enduring meaning. The Epic of Gilgamesh explores friendship, power, loss, and the search for meaning in a mortal life. Its meditation on death and human purpose remains profoundly relevant. Summary of the Vedas, the oldest and most sacred scriptures of Hindu book. Nature of the Vedas. The Vedas are the oldest surviving sacred texts of Hinduism and among the earliest religious writings in human history. They form the foundational corpus of Indian spiritual, philosophical, and ritual thought. Meaning and authority. The word Veda means knowledge or sacred wisdom. The Vedas are regarded as Sruti, that which is heard, believed to be divinely revealed rather than authored by humans. Oral transmission. For centuries, the Vedas were transmitted orally with extraordinary precision through memorization and recitation. This oral tradition ensured textual stability long before writing was introduced. Historical context. The composition of the Vedas is generally dated between approximately 1500 and 500 BCE, during the early Indo-Aryan period in the Indian subcontinent. Their development spans several centuries. The four Vedas. The Vedic corpus consists of four main collections: the Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. Each serves a distinct religious and ritual function. The Rig Veda. The Rig Veda is the oldest and most important of the four. It consists of 1,028 hymns dedicated to deities such as Agni, Indra, Varuna, and Soma, expressing cosmic order, praise, and devotion. Polytheism and cosmic order. Vedic religion emphasizes a dynamic pantheon of gods who embody natural and moral forces. Central to this worldview is Ta, the cosmic order that sustains the universe. The Sama Veda. The Sama Veda focuses on musical chants derived largely from the Rig Veda. Its primary purpose is liturgical, guiding priests in the melodic recitation of hymns during rituals. The Yajur Veda. The Yajur Veda provides detailed prose formulas and instructions for sacrificial ceremonies. It reflects the growing complexity of ritual practice and priestly specialization. The Atharva Veda. The Atharva Veda differs in tone, addressing everyday concerns such as healing, protection, domestic rituals, and social harmony. It reveals popular religious beliefs alongside formal ritualism. Structure of Vedic texts. Each Veda is organized into 4 layers: Samhitas, hymns; Brahmanas, ritual explanations; Aranyaka, forest texts; and Upanishads, philosophical teachings. Ritual and sacrifice. Sacrifice, yajna, is central to early Vedic religion. Ritual acts were believed to sustain cosmic balance and ensure prosperity, fertility, and divine favor. Role of the priestly class. The Vedas reflect a stratified society where priests, Brahmins, held religious authority. Mastery of sacred speech and ritual precision was considered essential for cosmic efficacy. Emergence of philosophy. The later portions of the Vedas, especially the Upanishads, mark a shift from ritual to philosophical inquiry. Questions about the self, existence, and ultimate reality become central. Brahman and Atman. The Upanishads introduced the concepts of Brahman, ultimate reality, and Atman, the inner self. Their identity becomes the core insight of later Hindu philosophy. Karma and samsara. Ideas of karma, action and consequence, and samsara, cycle of rebirth, begin to take shape within late Vedic thought, laying the groundwork for Indian religious traditions. Liberation, moksha. The Vedas ultimately point toward liberation from suffering and rebirth. Knowledge, discipline, and realization, rather than ritual alone, become paths to spiritual freedom. Ethical vision. Although not systematized as moral law, the Vedas promote truthfulness, social duty, dharma, hospitality, and reverence for life as integral to cosmic harmony. Influence on Indian civilization. The Vedas profoundly shaped Indian culture, language, Sanskrit, philosophy, ritual practice, and social organization. Later Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions developed in dialogue with them. Enduring significance. The Vedas remain living texts, recited and studied to this day. As both religious scripture and philosophical foundation, they represent humanity's earliest sustained inquiry into the nature of reality. Summary of the Book of the Dead, Parade Hammurabi. Also, it's known as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. The Book of the Dead is an ancient Egyptian funerary corpus composed of spells, hymns, and ritual instructions intended to guide the deceased through the afterlife. It is not a single book, but a flexible collection of texts adapted to individual burials. Meaning of the title. The original Egyptian title, Parade Hammurabi, means coming forth by day, emphasizing rebirth, illumination, and victorious emergence rather than death itself. The work focuses on life beyond death, not annihilation. Historical development. The text evolved over centuries, drawing from earlier funerary literature such as the pyramid texts and coffin texts. Its most common form dates from the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE. Purpose and function. The spells serve as magical, moral, and spiritual tools enabling the deceased to overcome dangers, answer divine judges, and achieve eternal existence among the gods. Concept of the afterlife. The Egyptian afterlife is portrayed as a continuation of earthly life on a perfected plane. Survival depends on knowledge, righteousness, and harmony with cosmic order. The human soul. The text reflects a complex understanding of the soul, composed of multiple elements such as the Ka, vital force, Ba, personality, Ak, transfigured spirit, Ib, heart, and Rin, name. Role of knowledge. Knowing sacred names, spells, and formulas is essential. Knowledge itself becomes salvific, allowing the deceased to pass gates, defeat demons, and claim divine status. Judgment of the dead. One of the central scenes is the weighing of the heart, where the heart of the deceased is measured against the feather of Ma'at, truth and justice. This ritual determines the soul's fate. Ma'at is moral law. Ma'at represents cosmic order, truth, and balance. Ethical living is not optional. Moral failure leads to annihilation rather than eternal torment. The negative confession. The deceased recites declarations of innocence before 42 divine assessors, denying acts of injustice. Morality is defined by social responsibility and restraint from harm. Osiris and resurrection. Osiris, god of the dead and rebirth, presides over judgment. Identification with Osiris allows the deceased to participate in cycles of death and regeneration. Dangers of the Duat. The underworld, Duat, is filled with serpents, demons, gates, and trials. Spells protect the soul from dismemberment, devouring beasts, and oblivion. Transformation and power. The deceased may transform into birds, gods, or elements of nature. These metamorphoses symbolize freedom, mobility, and divine assimilation. The solar journey. The soul often accompanies the sun god Ra on his nightly voyage through darkness. This aligns personal resurrection with cosmic renewal. Magic and religion. Magic, Heka, is not opposed to religion but is an extension of divine power. Ritual speech activates cosmic forces embedded in words. Individual customization. Each papyrus varies in length and content, reflecting social status, profession, and personal piety. The text is a negotiated contract between human and divine realms. Death as transition. death is treated as a passage, not an end. The deceased must awaken, speak, remember, and act. Passivity leads to extinction. Social and political order. The ethical ideals of Paret-Hammurabi reinforce social harmony, obedience to law, and respect for hierarchy, mirroring Egyptian civilization itself. Influence on later thought. Concepts such as moral judgment, resurrection, sacred speech, and the weighing of deeds influenced later Mediterranean and Abrahamic traditions. Enduring legacy. The Book of the Dead stands as one of humanity's earliest spiritual manuals, blending ethics, cosmology, and ritual into a coherent vision of eternal life grounded in justice and knowledge. Summary of the Code of Hammurabi. And most complete written legal codes in human history. It was promulgated by King Hammurabi of Babylon around 1754 BC and inscribed on a large basalt stele. Historical context. The code emerged during the height of the Old Babylonian Empire, a period marked by political centralization, urban growth, and economic complexity. Law became a tool for unifying diverse peoples under royal authority. Purpose of the law. Hammurabi presents the code as a divine mandate intended to establish justice, protect the weak, and restrain the strong. Law is portrayed as a moral and social necessity, not merely administrative regulation. Divine legitimation. The stele depicts Hammurabi receiving authority from Shamash, the god of justice. This imagery reinforces the idea that law originates from divine will and that the king acts as its earthly executor. Structure of the code. The text consists of a prologue, 282 legal provisions, and an epilogue. The prologue and epilogue emphasize Hammurabi's righteousness, while the laws address practical aspects of daily life. Casuistic legal style. Most laws follow a conditional if-then format, establishing specific consequences for specific actions. This casuistic style reflects early legal reasoning based on precedent and proportionality. Social hierarchy. The code distinguishes sharply between social classes: free citizens, awilam, commoners, mushkanam, and slaves, wardam. Legal penalties vary depending on the status of both victim and offender. Principle of retribution. The famous principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye, is central to the code. Punishment aims to mirror the offense, reinforcing balance and deterrence rather than rehabilitation. Family and marriage laws. Many provisions regulate marriage, divorce, adultery, inheritance, and parental authority. The family is treated as the foundation of social order and economic stability. Status of women. Women possess certain legal rights, including property ownership and divorce under specific conditions. However, their status remains subordinate, and punishments for sexual misconduct are often severe. Slavery and labor. slaves are treated as property but are still protected by law to some extent. The code regulates wages, labor contracts, and responsibilities of employers and workers. Economic and commercial law. Detailed rules govern trade, loans, interest rates, partnerships, and debt. These laws reflect a sophisticated commercial society reliant on agriculture, craftsmanship, and long-distance trade. Property and land ownership. The code addresses theft, damage to property, irrigation disputes, and land tenure. Protection of property is central to maintaining social order and economic productivity. Criminal law and punishment. Crimes such as theft, fraud, perjury, and violence are punished harshly, often by death or mutilation. Justice is swift, public, and exemplary. Judicial procedure. Judges are held accountable for their rulings and may be punished for corruption or error. This reflects an early awareness of judicial responsibility and institutional integrity. Collective responsibility. Some laws impose collective punishment, such as holding communities responsible for crimes committed within their territory. Social cohesion and mutual surveillance are thus enforced. Moral vision of justice. Justice in Hammurabi's code is not egalitarian but hierarchical. Fairness is defined within social rank, reflecting the worldview of an ordered, stratified society. Political authority. The code reinforces royal power by presenting the king as protector, judge, and moral guardian. Law becomes a means of legitimizing centralized authority. Influence on later legal traditions. While not a direct source of later biblical or classical law, the code influenced Near Eastern legal culture and shaped ideas of written law and accountability. Enduring significance. The Code of Hammurabi stands as a monumental achievement in legal history. It reveals how early civilizations understood justice, power, and social order, laying foundations for later legal thought. Summary of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Bardo Thodol. Nature of the text. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, traditionally known as the Bardo Thodol, Liberation Through Hearing in the Intermediate State, is a central funerary and spiritual text in Tibetan Buddhism. It functions as a guide for consciousness during death, the after-death state, and rebirth. Authorship and transmission. The text is traditionally attributed to Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, in the 8th century and later revealed by Karma Lingpa in the 14th century as a terma, hidden treasure teaching. It reflects Tantric Buddhist doctrine rather than historical authorship in the modern sense. Meaning of Bardo. The term bardo refers to an intermediate or transitional state. While commonly associated with the period between death and rebirth, Tibetan Buddhism recognizes multiple bardos throughout life, including meditation and dreaming. Purpose of the text. The primary aim of the Bardo Thodol is liberation from cyclic existence, samsara. By recognizing the true nature of reality during the bardos, consciousness can attain enlightenment or a favorable rebirth. Oral recitation. The text is traditionally read aloud to the dying person or the deceased. Hearing the instructions is believed to awaken recognition and clarity, even after physical death. The moment of death, Chikai Bardo. At the moment of death, consciousness encounters the clear light, Odi Sol, the ultimate reality of pure awareness. Recognizing this light leads to immediate liberation. Failure to recognize the clear light. Most beings fail to recognize the clear light due to ignorance and habitual attachments. This failure propels consciousness into the next Bardo phase. The Bardo of reality, Koniad Bardo. In this stage, peaceful and wrathful deities appear as manifestations of one's own mind. These visions are symbolic expressions of enlightened and unenlightened mental states. Peaceful deities. The peaceful deities represent compassion, wisdom, and enlightened awareness. Recognizing them as projections of the mind leads toward liberation. Wrathful deities. The wrathful deities symbolize fear, aggression, and ignorance. They are not external punishers but expressions of inner psychological forces. Role of fear and attachment. Fear arises when the mind misidentifies these visions as external threats. Attachment to ego and form prevents recognition of their true nature. Karma and mental habit. The experiences in the Bardo are shaped by karma, understood as deeply ingrained mental tendencies rather than divine judgment. The text emphasizes personal responsibility for one's mental conditioning. The Bardo of Becoming, Sidpa Bardo. If liberation is not achieved, consciousness enters the Bardo of rebirth. Here, desire and aversion drive the process toward a new incarnation. Rebirth process. The text describes how attraction to potential parents leads to rebirth. This process is driven by ignorance and craving, reinforcing the cycle of samsara. Ethical implications. The Bardo Thodol underscores the importance of ethical living, meditation, and mindfulness during life. Preparation for death begins long before dying. Psychological interpretation. Modern interpreters view the text as a profound psychological map of consciousness, trauma, fear, and ego dissolution rather than a literal afterlife geography. Impermanence and non-self. The text reinforces core Buddhist teachings of impermanence, anicca, and non-self, anatta. Liberation requires letting go of fixed identity. Compassionate guidance. The text speaks gently and repeatedly reassures the consciousness, reflecting Buddhism's emphasis on compassion even in the face of death. Influence beyond Tibet. Since its translation into Western languages in the 20th century, the book has influenced psychology, comparative religion, philosophy, and end-of-life care. Enduring significance. The Tibetan Book of the Dead remains a profound spiritual manual, offering a vision of death not as annihilation,
The Art of War book by Sun Tzu. The Art of War is a foundational treatise on strategy, attributed to the Chinese general and philosopher Sun Tzu. Written around the 5th century BCE, it presents war as a matter of intelligence, planning, and adaptability rather than brute force. Sun Tzu begins by emphasizing that war is a matter of vital importance to the state, affecting survival or destruction. Therefore, it must be studied with seriousness and foresight. He introduces 5 constant factors that determine success: moral influence, weather, terrain, command, and discipline. A wise leader evaluates these before engaging in conflict. The book stresses that the highest form of victory is defeating the enemy without fighting. Prolonged warfare exhausts resources and weakens morale, even for the victor. Strategic planning is essential. Success comes from careful calculation, preparation, and understanding relative strengths and weaknesses before battle begins. Sun Tzu highlights the importance of speed and efficiency. Delays increase costs and give enemies time to adapt, making swift action a decisive advantage. Deception is central to warfare. By misleading the enemy with intentions, strength, or position, a commander gains psychological superiority. Knowing both oneself and the enemy guarantees victory. Ignorance of either leads to uncertainty and potential defeat. Terrain plays a decisive role in outcomes. High ground, narrow passes, open fields, and hostile environments must all be used strategically. Leadership qualities are critical. A successful commander embodies wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness. Discipline within the army ensures unity and obedience. Without order, even large forces collapse into chaos. Sun Tzu discusses energy and momentum, explaining how controlled force can be released at the right moment to overwhelm the enemy. Flexibility is a recurring theme. Fixed plans fail in changing circumstances. Adaptability ensures survival and advantage. The use of spies and intelligence gathering is portrayed as indispensable. Accurate information reduces uncertainty and prevents costly mistakes. Psychological warfare is as important as physical combat. Breaking the enemy's morale often leads to surrender without resistance. Sun Tzu warns against emotional decision-making. Anger, pride, and impatience cloud judgment and lead to ruin. The ideal general avoids unnecessary battles and chooses engagements only when victory is assured. Unity between ruler and military leadership strengthens the state. Political interference in military matters often leads to failure. Victory is achieved through harmony between strategy, timing, environment, and human factors, not through force alone. Ultimately, the art of war transcends warfare. Its principles apply to leadership, business, politics, and personal conflict, emphasizing wisdom, restraint, and strategic thought.
Summary of The Republic by Plato. The Republic is a philosophical dialogue written by Plato around the 4th century BCE. It is presented as a conversation led by Socrates, focusing on the central question of justice, what it is and whether the just life is happier and better than the unjust one. The dialogue opens with Socrates discussing justice with Cephalus, who defines it as telling the truth and paying one's debts. Socrates quickly shows that this definition is inadequate, since telling the truth or repaying debts can sometimes cause harm. Polemarchus refines the definition by suggesting that justice means helping friends and harming enemies. Socrates challenges this by arguing that justice cannot involve harming anyone because harming people makes them worse, not better. Thrasymachus then enters the discussion aggressively, claiming that justice is nothing more than the advantage of the stronger. According to him, rulers create laws to serve their own interest, and obedience to these laws is called justice. Socrates responds by showing contradictions in Thrasymachus' argument. He suggests that true rulers, like true craftsmen, seek the good of those they govern rather than their own advantage. Glaucon and Adeimantus, Plato's brothers, revive Thrasymachus' challenge in a stronger form. They argue that people practice justice only out of fear of punishment and social consequences, not because justice is good in itself. To answer this challenge, Socrates proposes examining justice on a larger scale by imagining an ideal city. By understanding justice in the city, they hope to understand justice in the individual soul. Socrates describes the origin of the city as arising from human needs and cooperation. He outlines a simple city based on basic necessities, which Glaucon criticizes as a city of pigs, prompting the development of a more complex city. With complexity comes the need for guardians to defend the city. Socrates emphasizes that these guardians must be both strong and gentle, combining physical training with philosophical education. Education becomes central in shaping just citizens. Socrates insists on strict control over poetry and music, allowing only stories that promote virtue, courage, and respect for the gods. Physical education is paired with musical education to create balance in the soul. Excess in either leads to harshness or softness, while harmony produces a well-ordered character. Socrates introduces the idea that justice in the city consists of each class performing its proper role. The rulers govern, the guardians protect, and the producers provide for material needs. This structure leads to the famous definition of justice as doing one's own work and not meddling in the work of others. Justice is thus understood as harmony and order, not merely obedience to laws. Socrates extends this idea to the individual soul, which he divides into three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. A just person is one in whom reason rules, spirit supports reason, and appetite obeys. The dialogue then turns to the concept of the philosopher king. Socrates argues that only philosophers who love truth and possess knowledge of the good are fit to rule the city. To explain philosophical knowledge, Socrates presents the allegory of the cave. Human beings are compared to prisoners who mistake shadows for reality until one is freed and comes to know the truth. The freed prisoner represents the philosopher, who ascends from ignorance to knowledge. Returning to the cave symbolizes the philosopher's duty to govern and educate others, despite resistance. Socrates contrasts just political systems with unjust ones, describing a decline from aristocracy to timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and finally tyranny. Tyranny is presented as the most unjust and miserable form of rule. The tyrannical individual mirrors the tyrannical state, enslaved by desires, driven by fear, and incapable of true happiness. Justice, by contrast, brings inner peace and order. The dialogue concludes by affirming that justice benefits the soul both in this life and the next. Through the myth of Plato suggests that justice has cosmic significance, rewarding souls beyond death and reinforcing the value of the just life.
Summary of the Book of Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. Purpose of the work. The Nicomachean Ethics is Aristotle's foundational treatise on moral philosophy, written to examine the nature of the good life for human beings. Rather than focusing on abstract ideals, Aristotle approaches ethics as a practical science concerned with how people should live. The highest good, eudaimonia. Aristotle begins by asserting that every action aims at some good, and the highest good is eudaimonia, often translated as happiness or human flourishing. This is not a fleeting emotional state but a complete and fulfilling life. Happiness as an activity. Happiness, for Aristotle, is not passive pleasure but an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. A person is happy insofar as they live and act well over a complete lifetime. The human function argument. Aristotle argues that to understand happiness, one must understand the distinctive function of human beings. Since reason distinguishes humans from other creatures, the good life consists in rational activity performed excellently. Virtue as excellence. Virtue, arete, is defined as excellence in fulfilling one's function. Moral virtue shapes character, while intellectual virtue shapes reasoning and understanding. Moral and intellectual virtues. Aristotle distinguishes moral virtues, such as courage and generosity, from intellectual virtues, such as wisdom and understanding. Moral virtues are developed through habit, while intellectual virtues arise primarily through teaching. Habit and moral education. Virtue is not innate but cultivated through repeated action. By performing just and temperate actions, individuals become just and temperate, emphasizing the role of education and upbringing. The doctrine of the mean. Moral virtue is a mean between two extremes, excess and deficiency. For example, courage lies between recklessness and cowardice. The mean is relative to the individual and determined by reason. Voluntary action and responsibility. Aristotle stresses that moral responsibility depends on voluntary action. Actions done knowingly and freely are subject to praise or blame, while involuntary actions merit forgiveness. Choice and deliberation. Ethical action involves rational choice, proeresis, which arises from deliberation about means to desired ends. Virtue ensures that one chooses well. Justice as a special virtue. Justice occupies a central place in Aristotle's ethics. It governs relations between individuals and concerns fairness, lawfulness, and equality within the political community. Types of justice. Aristotle distinguishes distributive justice, which concerns fair allocation of goods, from corrective justice, which rectifies wrongs in transactions and disputes. Friendship and the good life. Friendship, philia, is essential to human flourishing. Aristotle identifies three types: friendships of utility, pleasure, and virtue, with the last being the highest and most enduring. Friendship and moral growth. Virtuous friendships help individuals grow morally, as friends mirror one another's character and encourage excellence. A life without friendship is incomplete. Pleasure and virtue. Aristotle argues that pleasure is not inherently bad and often accompanies virtuous activity. The best pleasures arise naturally from good actions, not from excess or indulgence. Practical wisdom, phronesis. Practical wisdom is the intellectual virtue that enables correct moral judgment. It allows individuals to discern the appropriate action in specific circumstances. Weakness of will, akrasia. Aristotle explores the problem of acting against one's better judgment. He explains weakness of will as a failure to apply knowledge correctly under the influence of desire. The role of politics. Ethics is inseparable from politics because individuals achieve flourishing within a community. The goal of the state is to cultivate virtue among citizens. The best life, contemplation. In the final book, Aristotle argues that the highest form of happiness lies in contemplation, theoria. This activity reflects the divine element in human nature and offers the most lasting fulfillment. Lasting significance. Nicomachean Ethics remains one of the most influential works in moral philosophy. Its emphasis on character, virtue, and practical reason continues to shape contemporary ethics, political theory, and moral education. Summary of Sahih Al-Bukhari, the most authoritative book after the Holy Quran. Nature of work. Sahih Al-Bukhari is a canonical collection of prophetic traditions, hadith, compiled by the Muslim scholar Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, 810–870 CE. It occupies the highest rank among Sunni hadith collections for authenticity. Purpose and scope. The work aims to preserve the sayings, actions, and tacit approvals of the Prophet Muhammad. It serves as a foundational source for Islamic law, theology, ethics, and daily practice. Historical context. Compiled in the 3rd century AH, 9th century CE, the book emerged during an era of rigorous scholarly scrutiny of transmitted reports. This period witnessed the formalization of hadith sciences. Al-Bukhari's scholarly method. Al-Bukhari traveled extensively across the Islamic world to collect reports. He applied exceptionally strict criteria, accepting only narrations with continuous, reliable chains of transmission, isnad. Criteria of authenticity. Each narrator had to be known for moral integrity, adla, and precise memory, ab. Al-Bukhari also required proven contemporaneity and direct meeting between narrators. Size and selection. From hundreds of thousands of narrations, Al-Bukhari selected approximately 7,275 reports, including repetitions, or about 2,600 without repetition, highlighting the rigor of his selection. Structure of the book. The collection is organized into books, kutub, and chapters, abwab, each addressing specific legal, theological, or ethical themes. Chapter headings often reflect Al-Bukhari's own legal reasoning. Relationship to the Quran. Al-Bukhari functions as an explanatory and practical complement to the Quran. It clarifies Quranic injunctions and demonstrates their application in the Prophet's life. Theology and Creed. The book includes chapters on faith, Iman, divine decree, Qadar, and the attributes of God. These narrations shape Sunni theological positions grounded in revelation. Ritual worship. Extensive sections detail prayer, fasting, almsgiving, pilgrimage, and purification. These narrations form the practical basis of Islamic ritual law, fiqh. Legal and judicial matters. The collection addresses contracts, commerce, marriage, divorce, inheritance, and criminal law. Jurists rely heavily on these reports for legal derivation. Ethics and character. Many narrations emphasize moral conduct, truthfulness, humility, patience, mercy, and justice. Ethical refinement is presented as inseparable from faith. Social relations. The book addresses family ties, neighborly rights, community solidarity, and governance. Social harmony is framed as a religious obligation. Knowledge and scholarship. Al-Bukhari includes chapters on the virtue of knowledge, teaching, and learning. Seeking knowledge is portrayed as a sacred act central to religious life. Prophetic biography. Numerous narrations illuminate the prophet's character, leadership, and personal conduct, contributing significantly to Sirah, prophetic biography. Trials and eschatology. The collection discusses signs of the hour, trials, fitan, the afterlife, paradise, and hell. These narrations shape Islamic eschatological imagination. Repetition and variation. Some narrations appear multiple times under different chapters. This reflects al-Bukhari's method of highlighting distinct legal or theological implications. Scholarly reception. The book was unanimously accepted by Sunni scholars as the most authentic hadith collection. It has been studied, memorized, and commented upon for centuries. Major commentaries. Among the most famous commentaries is Fath al-Bari by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, which elucidates linguistic, legal, and contextual dimensions of the text. Enduring significance. Al-Bukhari remains a cornerstone of Islamic civilization. Its influence extends across law, theology, ethics, and spirituality, preserving the prophetic legacy with unparalleled rigor.